Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another round of deck techs by yours truly, your pal Alkadron. I was told that my last round of deck techs was a little long. I kind of made them all at once. They were all about 40 minutes. That was apparently too much deck tech. So I'm going to try to speed this one along a little bit, and we are starting off strong right away. Number one, everyone's favorite, Mayhem Devil. This particular clown loves people sacrificing things. Whenever anyone sacrifices anything, you get to put a damage somewhere. Which, however strong you think this effect is, the reality is that it's stronger than that. People sacrifice things about 30 to 40% more often than they think they do. This guy just triggers all the time without ever stopping. One damage seems small, it's not. This deck seems fun. It is sort of. It's really easy for Mayhem Devil to turn into a really severe, really oppressive control deck. We love him anyway. Let's talk about all the ridiculous, degenerate stuff you can do with Mayhem Devil. We're going to start with the obvious inclusions. Crack the Earth is nonsense. Everyone sacrifices a permanent. You get to deal 4 damage to whatever's left. It's crazy. You can make everyone sacrifice a creature with innocent blood. You can make everyone sacrifice a creature when Abyssal Gatekeeper dies. You can make everyone sacrifice a creature when Fleshbag hits the field, and you can make everyone sacrifice a creature when Slum Reaper hits the field. Every single one of these cards is straight up, you just kill 3 creatures, and then you kill more stuff. We are also, this effect is so good. This everyone sacrifices stuff effect is so good. We're running ones that only hit lands. Tremble and the Blizzard Herder make each player sacrifice a land. That's not going to kill creatures, except when it does kill creatures. Being able to spend 2 mana to get 4 of these triggers is really horrifyingly oppressive. Well, it's a little horrific. We are also going to sacrifice our own stuff. Honestly, these cards feel a little bit redundant in the deck. They're kind of in here to catch hexproof things. Like, these will help you kill Boggles. I guess Suicidal Charge is probably much too slow to kill Boggles. But Bloodfire Dwarf can smoke a Boggle if you hit it early. These guys will deal 1 damage to each creature. I originally put them in the deck expecting to have some difficulty with like go wide token strategies. Decks that are going to make 1,000,000 tokens and just attack with everything. Honestly, that's not a problem. Mayhem Devil puts out so much damage so consistently. I don't think these 2 cards are necessary. But I like them because in addition to clearing the board stuff really efficiently and effectively, they also sacrifice themselves to do it. So that's more triggers for the Mayhem Devil. We also have Bloodfire Infusion and Gangrenous Zombies to fill this role. Zombies will deal 2 damage to everything when you sacrifice it, and then a 3rd damage to something from the Mayhem Devil. And the Infusion will deal however much power you have in a creature. It'll deal that much damage to things. So in the off chance that people are playing really big creatures that you have trouble blasting down with Mayhem Devil's damage, Bloodfire Infusion can help you ratchet up that damage more quickly. These are the other control pieces that involve sacrificing themselves. It's just really hard to build up any sort of board against this deck because you've got the Seal and the Solvent to kill big creatures, and as you're killing big creatures, the Mayhem Devil's going to kill little creatures. The Seal of Fire can just go to someone's face if you need it to, and it's so cheap. So all of these cards are just going to trigger the Mayhem Devil for days and keep the board really clear. So much dying happening all the time. This gets a slightly separate category of card, only because these other cards, this as well, all of these cards sacrifice themselves to give you Mayhem Devil triggers. These cards sacrifice other permanents to give you Mayhem Devil triggers. So that's an important sort of balance to keep in mind as you're building a Mayhem Devil deck, is some of the sacrifice triggers are sort of self-contained, like the Seal of Fire. This card sacrifices itself. Some of the sacrifice triggers, you need other permanents in play to sacrifice to be able to use them. And you just have to be mindful that you have a really good balance between the two, so you're not, like, you don't want Mayhem Devil to be your only creature in play when Fling is in your hand. That's not where you want to be. So make sure that you have enough stuff to sacrifice other things as well. This will deal lots of damage. This deals 5 damage. Both of these cards hit faces, which is pretty important. Mayhem Devil is really, really, really good at keeping the board clear, but as a control deck, your finisher is going to just be accumulating 30 damage on each player, which can be a challenge. So being able to send 5 to someone's face, or whatever this is to someone's face, is good. Makeshift Munitions is one of the downshifts we got in Commander Legends, and it is obscene in this deck. It lets you sacrifice any artifact or creature to put 1 damage somewhere. This thing's 1 damage anywhere, repeatable with this thing's 1 damage anywhere, is just a nightmare to try and fight through. Like, there is no creature-based deck that can outrun the removal that this generates. If you want to fight through this, your answer is kill the Mayhem Devil, disenchant the munitions, start over from nothing. Let's see if I can build up a board state before the devil comes back. It's gross. The thing that makes these two cards especially really, really good is that there's an entire suite of artifacts that you don't have to sacrifice to get value out of. There's Chromatic Star and Terrarion. They have built-in sacrifice effects. You can sacrifice them as a mana filter, but that's not what they're here for. They're here to be sacrificed to other effects, because when they get sacrificed, they replace themselves. So if you are sacrificing these cards to Makeshift Munitions, you're not even losing cards out of it. It's just gas, start to finish. So those cards are great. There are 6 of those cards. There's the 2 mana filters we got, the Star and the Terrarion. There's 2 spell bombs that do the same thing. You have to pay mana to draw a card off these guys, but their abilities, well, one of them has a really good ability. If you need to sacrifice this thing to itself, you can clear a graveyard, which is pretty important in Pauper. This thing can sacrifice itself to make something not block. That's not important. This one is just here to be sacrificed to other things. But they will both draw you a card when they get sacrificed, which is pretty great. There are also 2 implements from Kaladesh, Aether Revolt. One of those, I don't remember. I think this is Aether Revolt, and then Kaladesh had the puzzle knots, maybe? The implements have that same ability. When they die, you get to draw a card. And again, they have abilities that let you sacrifice them to themselves, so you can get some minor effect out of them and then still get the card off of them, and either way you're getting the damage trigger. Or if you don't need someone to discard a card, for example, then you can pitch the implement to the Makeshift Munitions, or the Artillerize, or any of the other cards in here. Crack the Earth. We'll get to other cards that sacrifice permanents. So these can be sacrificed to any number of different effects, and they still give you that card, which is incredible. It's like playing eggs, but all of the eggs are also removal. It's unreal. I sort of sort this card in with all of the implements and spell bombs as just tiny little artifacts that draw cards when they die. This one, if you sacrifice it to something else, you don't get the card, so you kind of have to sacrifice this guy to himself, but that's fine. The actual effect, putting a card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library, that's pretty useless, but with Mayhem Devil, this card functionally just says 1 mana, any other time later in the game, you can sacrifice this to deal 1 damage and draw a card, which is great. It's free. It just pays for itself. This is a great way to keep your hand full outside of Conjurer's Bauble. Yeah, these are two great ways to sacrifice those other artifacts as well. So we have, oh God, I'm already losing track of the overlapping synergies here. We have Artillerize and Makeshift Munitions that will let us sacrifice artifacts to do crazy control damage blowout plays. This is a different category because these will let us sacrifice artifacts to draw cards. So if you're sacrificing an Implement of Combustion to the Costly Plunder, then you're drawing 3 cards. And you're still dealing damage to things. It's crazy. Same with this, you can sacrifice Implement of Combustion to the Destructive Digger. That'll draw you a card off the Digger, a card off the Combustion, a damage off the Devil. It's just raw destructive value all the way down. In the continuing theme of cards that sacrifice to draw, Village Rites is pretty obscene for this deck. This deck was running like Skull Tap and Altar's Reap a year ago. We just have strictly better options now. This deck has been nothing but improving substantially for the last few years. Village Rites is just a 1-mana instant that lets you sacrifice a creature to draw 2 cards. So it won't hit that collection of artifacts that draw you bonus cards, but this deck should have an abundance of leftover spare creatures that you like to sacrifice for cards. So this is good. These are permanent effects that allow you to, or I guess they're permanents. They give you the ability to sacrifice other things to draw cards later, and you're drawing cards and you're dealing damage and you're gaining life. This is nonsense. I know that there's a third one of these. This is the Spark Reaver, so the third one must be the Soul Reaver of Mogus. It's an enchantment. I only run these 2. I kind of don't like that the Soul Reaver is an enchantment. That just makes it more vulnerable to more different removal spells. And I feel like these 2 are plenty with how the deck plays. But your mileage may vary with your different build of Mayhem Devil, so it's still a great card. You should consider it. Vulturous Aven and Moriok Replica are 2 other cards. These cards are nice because they can sacrifice themselves. The Aven can sacrifice other creatures as well, and both of them will draw you 2 cards and lose you 2 life. So these are handy ways to keep your hand full of new and horrific ways to control the board. This card I have in the sacrifice to put cards into your hand slot. Because it sacrifices itself, this one is pretty close to the cutting board though. I feel like this is not going to pay off as well as I wanted it to. Again, a couple of years ago this card was great in the deck, but the deck has shifted since then and now it's less good. It's very expensive to activate it, and the payoff you get for this expense is it puts 3 creatures into your hand from your graveyard. The problem is I don't always have 3 creatures in my graveyard that I want to come back because my graveyard is usually full of this stuff. And this is the stuff that you don't want to be hitting your font of return on. Like, you don't want to put these cards in your hand. You want these cards to be in your graveyard so that you can use these Encore abilities. Encore with the Mayhem Devil is absurd. All 3 of these cards are ridiculous. This one, when you Encore it, you get, we'll assume you have 3 opponents because that's fairly typical. When you Encore this, you get 3 copies of it, 3 token copies of it. Each one of them gets this -1/-1 attack trigger. So that will let you kill small things by itself. And then after they attack, all 3 of them get sacrificed, and they give you 3 Mayhem Devil triggers. So that's like 6 toughness worth of stuff that you can just kill. It's too easy. This one And I mean, it's also attacking the board for 9. That's fine. This guy will attack the board for 12, your 3 copies of your 4-power creature. And then when your 3 copies of him get sacrificed, you get to put 3 damage anywhere you want, and you get 3 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens that you can sacrifice to stuff like Bushmeat Poacher or Spark Reaver or Village Rites for 3 more damage triggers and free card draw. This, I think, is the best of them, which is ridiculous because both of those other cards are absurd. This one, this single card by itself is worth 8 Mayhem Devil triggers. You cast it for 1 very early. You sacrifice it to Village Rites or something to draw a card. So that's your first trigger is sacrificing it to draw a card to like Village Rites or whatever. Or Artillerize. You sacrifice it to Artillerize to kill something. When it dies, you get a treasure token. Treasure token is free money. It's a free mana, and the treasure token triggers Mayhem Devil. Like I said, people sacrifice things like 30 to 40% more often than they think they do. This guy is just a horror show on a unicycle. So you get him, you get his treasure token, then you encore him, you get 3 more copies of him. So now you're up to 5. I gotta get my thumb in the frame. You're up to 5 triggers when he comes in. Honestly, it's probably the best plan to encore this guy in your second main phase. If you encore him in your first main phase, he's just a 1/1. People are going to block him and kill him, and then he doesn't get automatically sacrificed. If you have a sacrifice outlet, like Spark Reaper or Bushmeat Poacher, then it's fine. You can attack the board with your 3 token copies of him, and whichever ones get blocked, you can sacrifice for cards, which is crazy. But if you don't have the sacrifice outlet online, you should encore him in your second main phase so that your token copies are not forced to attack, and then all 3 of them die, which creates 3 more Mayhem Devil triggers and gives you 3 more treasures, which also give you Mayhem Devil triggers. 1 card, 8 triggers. It's ridiculous. Speaking of getting lots of triggers out of 1 card, this is one of my favorites in the deck, Cathari Bomber. This guy is worth talking about a little bit because, again, he's a lot like the Impulsive Pilferer. He's just a 1-man wrecking crew with this Mayhem Devil online. He is a 2/2 flyer for 3. When he damages someone, you get to create 2 goblins and sacrifice it. The weird thing about the way this is written is that it is not a conditional ability. Usually when they create abilities like this, they template them with the words, when Cathari Bomber deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice it if you do create 2 goblins. Which is not what this says. What this says is when it damages a player, you create 2 goblins and you sacrifice it. If you damage someone and you put that ability on the stack, and then you sacrifice it to something else, like Village Rites or Spark Reaper or Bushmeat Poacher or Destructive Digger doesn't get it. Costly Plunder maybe. If you sacrifice it to something else with its ability on the stack, you get the benefits of sacrificing it to that thing, and you still get these goblins, which you can sacrifice to other things. If you have Spark Reaper in play, this card is like, it lets you draw like 6 cards. It's ridiculous. It lets you draw 6 cards while killing things. It's absurd how powerful this 1 card is. And then when it dies, you can unearth it. You can just do it again. This card is wild. It's so good in this deck. Mog War Marshal is another MVP. Echo is nothing but gas for us. That means that this guy will sacrifice himself. We just have to wait a turn. And I mean, obviously, if you can come up with a sacrifice outlet, do it. If not, he will sacrifice himself and give you that damage trigger. And he will leave behind 2 goblins for you to play with. One when he comes in and one when he dies. So this is worth 3 sacrifices, and one of them is automatic. That's crazy good. This guy is worth 4 sacrifices. 3 of them are 0/1 little mana tokens. That sacrificing them to deal damage and get mana is nothing but gas. This guy only gets 2 of those little Eldrazi spawn guys, but he's got a 4 power, which is actually pretty good. You might just want to, like, you might sacrifice the tokens for Mayhem Devil triggers, but after you've done that, to clear the board, you can just send this guy and he'll get through. 4 damage is a lot. This is the other card that creates hella tokens. It's not a creature, it is just a kill spell. So, contract killing will destroy a creature, and then it creates 2 treasures, and people sacrificing treasures is just more bonus removal. Like, you still get the mana for it, and you get to kill things. This deck is too good. Okay, we need to talk about what happens when you don't want to sacrifice your own things. A couple of these cards are really good at giving you lots of stuff to sacrifice. Like these guys will all give you lots and lots of sacrifice fodder. So if you have one of those sack engines online, these guys will do work for you. But you won't always have access to these guys. So when you don't have access to those guys, but you still want to sacrifice creatures, you should sacrifice your opponent's creatures. So here we have Goatnap, which is just the funniest version of this card. Gain control of a creature. If it's a goat, it gets a bonus. Wrangle is the cheapest version of this card. It only costs 2 mana, but it only gets small things. Power 4 or less. Mark of Mutiny is real good. It's the 3 mana one that puts a counter on a creature, and Hijack will get you any creature or artifact. I think mostly I just really like Hijack because of the art. I'm a big fan of Angrath in the story and the cards. These are the 4 treason effects that I went with in this deck. There used to be a lot more. I cut it down to just 4 because I wanted to, in addition to having a Mayhem deck, I also built a deck for Jury, the Murder Clown. And I wanted to differentiate them a little bit, and so I made the Jury deck the one that runs all of these treason effects. So Jury is the audience participation Murder Clown. This is just a little taste of that. Stealing a creature, attacking with it, and then sacrificing it to a Village Rites always feels good. And you get to deal bonus damage to things when you sacrifice them. It's pretty solid. If you don't want to have a Mayhem Devil and a Jury deck at the same time, obviously, I would encourage you to run more of these effects. They're really oppressive. We got some death triggers over here as well. We are running out of cards for me to talk about, so the pile's getting thin. These are our death trigger effects. Falconwrath Noble hopefully needs no introduction. He is our Pauper Aristocrat's king. Whenever any creature dies, you get to drain a player for a life, and lots of creatures will be dying frequently. This guy will just eat removal all day, every day. Honestly, this is one of the reasons that I keep Font of Return in the deck for now, just because Font of Return is approximately the only way I have to recur the Noble, and he's going to get shocked or lightning bolted or cast down. People hate this card, and they're right to do so, and they will kill him instantly. Iguanar is half of the Noble. He deals the damage, but he doesn't gain you the life, but he costs less, so that's nice. Mortician Beetle, and the Mortician Beetle's really kind of absurd with stuff like Innocent Blood. Like, if you play Mortician Beetle and then you hit the Innocent Blood, four people sacrifice creatures, so your Mortician Beetle is just already instantly a 5/5. and you get to deal 4 damage to things if people have creatures left over. Mortician Beetle is kind of crazy in this deck. Scavenger is not as crazy. He only gets the counters when your own creatures die. But he does start as a 2/3 flyer, and he is a sacrifice outlet once when he comes in, and that sacrifice gives him haste. So he's a pretty solid beater. This is an impressive card. When you think about how many of your own creatures are going to be dying to stuff like the Impulsive Pilferer, or the Hunt Master, or the Cathari Bomber, or the War Marshal, like, you can come up with a bunch of your own creatures to die to this to make the Scavenger a pretty severe threat. And every time they die, you get to deal this damage. With these guys, you get to deal the damage with the Mayhem Devil. These are both really severe, big, angry threats. I like them a lot. The last actual coherent category we need to talk about is Deathtouch. Dealing 1 damage to something is nice. Straight up murdering things is better. I think that we can agree. These are the 4 Deathtouch cards that I like in this deck. And I like them all because they are instants. I know some people play Mayhem Devil decks that use the enchantment versions of these. I forgot what they're called, but there's like a, there's one that looks like a Medusa's head that gives you like plus aspect of Gorgon, maybe, I don't know. Gives some power and toughness boost, and then gives it Deathtouch as an enchantment, like permanently. Honestly, I don't like those cards for 2 reasons. First of all, they tend to be more expensive than these guys. Like, these guys cost 1 and 2 and 1. So sometimes you'll end up in situations where you are casting this enchantment and then you don't get to do other things with your mana that turn, and then someone just murks your Mayhem Devil and you lose that and the enchantment. So it's a lot more high risk, high reward, and the reward honestly doesn't seem worth it. The other reason I don't like the enchantments is because if you have a Mayhem Devil enchanted with Deathtouch, you immediately become the arch enemy. Everyone will want to kill you and exclusively you. They will want to kill all your stuff, and they are right to do so. Mayhem Devil plus enchantment Deathtouch is crazy oppressive. No one else ever gets to have a board state ever. It's really gross to play against, and they should kill your stuff. And they will. The reason I like the instant version is because I like surprises, and I like that these cards feel less threatening when people are doing sort of like threat analysis. People will, if your Mayhem Devil doesn't have a Deathtouch enchantment on it, people will leave it alone for a while, and then you can still Deathtouch out their stuff very effectively, and then it goes away, and Mayhem Devil goes back to being less of a threat, and people are slightly more likely to leave it around, leave it alone. I also like that they all do other things. This is just the basic version. It's a power toughness boost. It's not important. This one draws you a card. Drawing cards is always good. This guy regenerates your Mayhem Devil, which can be very important. Again, he's going to draw a lot of hate, so regeneration, really good. Touch of Moonglove is probably the most absurd. It says whenever a creature dealt damage by the target of this spell dies, its controller loses 2 life. So if you Touch of Moonglove the Mayhem Devil and then kill 5 creatures with it, which is extremely easy and reasonable to do with all of these, each player sacrifices something. Killing 5 creatures is honestly pretty effortless. That's 10 damage to someone's face, which is a lot of damage. And you can, it is not inconceivable that you'll be killing a lot more than 5 creatures with a Touch of Moonglove. It's a 1 mana instant. You can time it right. Things will get out of hand. So, these are the last non-mana cards. This is all just the miscellaneous pile. Soul Channeling, again, people are going to come for Mayhem Devil. Giving him Regenerate is pretty good. Siphon Mind is just a generic, really good draw spell. Makes everyone discard and you draw that many. So, In a 4-player game, it'll take 3 cards out of your opponent's hands, and you'll draw 3 cards, which is outstanding for 4 mana. Fault Riders doesn't look like much, but it's a great way to end out games. Once per turn is a little restrictive, but having a 4/2 first strike online is actually pretty intimidating to attack into. This is a good defense, and like if you're using this to attack, being able to sacrifice a land every single turn to just chunk up that damage with the Mayhem Devil is useful. Like obviously you don't want to do this mid game because then you run out of mana, but as a late game card, Fault Riders is shockingly useful. Sun Crown Hunters is the most expensive card in this deck in terms of mana. I promise it's worth it. This card triples Mayhem Devil's damage to players. Anytime you want to hit a player with a Mayhem Devil, which happens a lot because you're going to run out of creatures to target real fast. Every time I've played this deck, I have killed all of the creatures on the board and still had triggers left over several times throughout the game. So there's going to be lots of times when you want to just send this 1 damage to someone's face, and you can send it to your own hunters instead, and then they take 3, and you're sending 3 to someone's face per trigger instead of just 1, which is great. This card's inclusion is another reason that I don't like Deathtouch enchantments. I want to be able to hit my own dinosaurs safely. That's the last of the actual spells. We are going to talk very briefly about some mana stuff. Renegade Map, great fixing, sacrifices itself. Bauble, everyone knows Bauble. Great fixing, and Ramp, sacrifices itself. These are some really good early plays. These guys are rocks that sacrifice themselves for cards later. Mindstone is only colorless, but it costs 2. Commander Sphere is a pretty common staple in our format. This will get you any color you want, and you can sacrifice it for free to draw a card. Orazka Relic is colorless only, but when you sacrifice it, you draw a card and you gain 3 life. These are the other 2 cards that sacrifice themselves for cards. This is obviously much, much worse than Commander Sphere. It costs the same, has the same effect, taps for a red or a black. Sacrificing it to draw a card costs a red, a black, and tap this. So compared to the Commander Sphere, you're spending 3 mana. You're 3 mana down to draw a card off this compared to this. So it's less good, but it's still good enough for the deck. Sacrificing stuff to draw cards is what we want to do all day, every day. The Locket is even more inefficient, but it draws you 2 cards. So it's if you do end up running out of gas late game, this is a great way to pick up a couple cards and try to get back into the game. This card I put in with the rocks because he's in here exclusively for land ramp. And the reason that this card is so good in this deck, it's not really because of Fault Riders. You might think that these sacrifice a land guys have something to do with it. They don't. By the time you're sacrificing lands to Fault Riders, it's because you don't care about putting them back into play with Scare Tiller. Scare Tiller is in here because this deck runs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fetch lands. And if you can fetch every turn with your Scare Tiller, you're just swimming in value. So we got the 2 basic ones, E-Wilds and Terramorphic. They're the super simple Pauper sacrifice. They sacrifice themselves for any basic coming in tapped, and that's fine. We like that. That's fixing. We have 4 panoramas. There is a 5th panorama, but it only gets basic lands that are not in our deck, so that's not useful. All of these will tap for a colorless that we can spend any way we want, and then we can pay 1 and sacrifice them to get a specific basic land type into play tapped. These are great ways. These are great because they give you mana when you just want to play them for colorless mana, and then you can sacrifice them when you need that effect. When you really need to put a damage somewhere, these things just come out of nowhere for that extra damage. The Warp Landscape is like the panoramas, it's a little bit more expensive. It still just comes in and taps to add a colorless to your pool. This costs 1 in tap to sacrifice it for a basic. This costs 2 in tap to sacrifice it for a basic. So it's less good, but it's still good enough. When your lands deal damage to things, when you're killing stuff with your lands to fix your mana, it's just raw value all day. The other 2 non-basics we run, surprising no one, also sacrifice themselves. This one sacrificed itself to give you a little zombie. This sacrificed itself to put a random creature from your graveyard into your hand. So both of these will sacrifice themselves for Mayhem Devil triggers and then give you something else to sacrifice for more Mayhem Devil triggers. These cards are outstanding for us. Everything else is basics. We got swamps, we got mountains, we got some snow-covered swamps. Those gangrenous zombies need some snow-covered swamps, so we need some of those. That's the whole deck. We've gone through every card. It's oppressive, but it's a good time. Who doesn't love murder cons? Remember, sacrifice Terramorphic Expanse. Love, Sniff How.